even Jesus said, love thy neighbor as thyself. Most of us do. We love other people the way we love ourselves. And a lot of times that's not necessarily a great way to love people because we don't know how to love ourselves. And I think that it was the belonging to myself. That's where the book started to take off, because when I belong to me, I can begin to belong to other people and I can make those choices of who I belong to. And so like there's this, you belong, you belong to the people who pour life into you. And that is like this connecting point where you can start to begin make choices that sometimes it is family, sometimes it is friendships, but it's the friendships who let you be you.
Well, hey, welcome to the Liminal Living Podcast. I am your curator of conversations, Dr. Tom Rundell. Today we talk with author, not just any author, but the #1 New York Times bestselling author, Matthew Paul Turner. Now, we're talking about his newest book, which is a children's book, which you might be thinking to yourself, why are we talking about a children's book on a podcast dedicated to dark nights and deconstruction? Well, Matthew Paul Turner writes beautiful theology about belonging and identity in God and our place in this world, and he makes these profound truths accessible to children. So if you've ever struggled with finding community or belonging after deconstruction or even during, you're in that liminal space of development. You're unsure of who you are and what you believe, and therefore you don't know who your people are in that moment. Matthew Paul Turner, no relation to Tina Turner, by the way, he's been on this journey of belonging, and he illustrates that journey in this new children's book, You Will Always Belong. And he just dives into this understanding of belonging, making these beautiful truths accessible to children, and therefore that inner child in you that also desires to belong. This conversation is for that little kid inside of your heart as well. And his starting place that he communicates in his book, learn to belong to yourself so that you know what people it is safe to belong to. It's a beautiful story, and so I'll set you loose on this episode of Matthew Paul Turner. Man, you want to see something cool? My wife bought me a great Christmas present this year. And it is this awesome sandalwood beard comb that folds into thing. And it feels so wonderful on the beard. It's my favorite thing.
That's nice.
If I forget this and I leave it at home, I am so upset with myself because this gets uncomfortable fast. So yes.
I could talk about beard stuff all day long, so you might not want to get me onto that that tangent.
You are also bearded. Have you ever tried to see how long the beard can get?
Well, I mean, I definitely have had I've had it down to here. It's been long before. It's my beard is not you have this really I even did the time, it's really it's just lays down nice, and mine just doesn't. Mine gets to a point where it starts to really not be as it'd be very difficult to manage on a regular basis. I mean, I could always get it to where it looked nice, but it just took a lot of product and a lot of time, and so it just it was just one of those things where I just decided to go shorter just for time management.
Yes. So, I don't use,
but I definitely have.
We got a delay. I think we got a delay. We'll work with the delay, but I don't use any product. I just use my wife's conditioner and that's it. And I trim it. I keep it very, very trim with I got the clippers and stuff, and I keep it shaped like I want it to. And then that guy right there.
Well, I was using, I fell down the rabbit hole of beard product. and I had sea salt spray, and I had like a heat straightener, and I have all the things.
Nice. I tried to do
So
handlebars, and mine just won't, no matter wax, nothing. And I play with it all day long, and sometimes they're all out of whack. But I tried, like my wife has this like real thin curler, and I wrapped my mustache around them and tried to get them to stay. And I got a good 2 hours out of that, and then I
yeah,
can't do, as the one thing, I did not get the lottery winning mustache for handlebars, because one is
well,
up and one is down
if
and
you
it's
ever
funky.
if you ever try, like, you should check out sea salt spray for beards, because it is, if you ever want a good hold on something, it really is a game changer.
Oh, I'm gonna have to look into that. I've done the wax and I've done
Yeah,
like different creams and things, but I've never tried sea salt spray. I'm gonna check that out.
yeah.
All right,
So
see, that's
try
why
it.
I hit record, because we had a whole conversation about beards. That never would have happened.
So
Oh, well,
yeah,
do you go by Matthew? Do you want to go by Matt? We've never talked before. I've only like
yeah.
interacted via text. So,
Matthew is fine. Yeah, no,
okay.
it's I that's fine.
All
Yeah.
right. All right. Matthew, welcome to the Liminal Living Podcast. You and your beard are most welcome here.
Thank you. I am honored to be here.
Now, I saw most recently that you had a terrifying experience. You were in the passenger seat of a vehicle that your 15-year-old was driving. What was that like?
Well, it was this was the first time that I decided we'd only practiced driving twice. And this was the second time, and we decided just to go and do our little neighborhood. And I I was under the it was a lot. I felt a whole lot of things because I'm trying to like be positive and keep my, my fears like at bay. But like it's like you forget how like when somebody is like just learning how to drive, how just like the direction of their steering wheel just kind of goes just off in the wrong direction just for a little too long, and their reaction time is not like quite there. And so teaching that, I'm like, please don't, let's not hit the mailbox. I mean, it was literally every mailbox was a thing. Like I'm going by it. And every time we would pass a car, we would go by the car like 15 miles an hour. Thankfully, I have magnets on the back of my car that say student driving. So that was to let everybody else know. But I was pressing on my pretend the fake brake so often. And it's funny because you of course go back to like when you were taught by when I went back to like when I was taught by my dad and how frustrated my dad got. And I am trying my best not to like recreate it. And I finally had to say, Elias, this is a learning experience for me too. So you're gonna have to be patient because I am not used to driving with somebody who is just learning how to do it, and thankfully he starts a driver's ed course in a month, and so hopefully that will give him some of the basics to to drive. But it was definitely an overwhelming experience that I was not prepared for.
I can imagine. I remember my
Yeah.
dad, after I had taken all my classes, and I went from driving this Duster. It was a little Duster. I'm 6'5", so I barely fit in the Duster. But that's what I learned on in driver's training. But then my dad owned this 8-passenger Ford conversion van. And so I had to go from the Duster to the van. Yeah. And I was
Oh
driving
my God.
myself to work. My dad was in the passenger seat, and I lived near Detroit at the time in a suburb. And I had to turn left. I'm coming up on the light and I had to turn left, and I didn't want to start slowing down. And I kept looking in the side mirror, like, I don't want to make the person behind me slow down too much. And I got all the way in the left-hand turn lane, and I never slowed down. And my dad is like holding the dashboard and pushing his imaginary brake and just yelling, "Stop, stop." And I slammed on the brakes and I screeched to a halt 6 inches before we would have hit the car in front of us. And that, I got to tell you, the person in front of us was so, like, they were so, like, out of their mind, like, oh my gosh, I almost got hit, that when the light turned green, they pulled a California green. They just shot before any other cars coming. Like, they were like, "See ya, I'm gone. I need to get away from this van."
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. But driving a van for the first time, when you've driven a small car, it is a different, because it's just bigger, and you can't see in front. Well, you might be able to see in front of you, but it's just a different experience. Like every something that's big, and like, I remember I had to drive a passenger van one time, like 15 passenger van, and the steering was like there was no give to the steering, so you would be like turning like this, and it wouldn't do anything, and so you felt like you had to do this the whole time.
Yeah.
Just to keep it going straight.
That's like my lawnmower. It's like I can turn it 2 inches both ways and nothing happens, and it's like that's when it catches, and then you turn. Yeah, the vans are like that. Well, you have written seven children's books now. Yeah, I was on your website.
I think this is my eighth.
This is your eighth?
My eighth children. Yeah.
You have written 8 children's books. You've written other books before that, and you've kind of become this really just a prominent person in social media, writing, substacking, and now children's books, and some have like landed on the New York Times like selling list, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So like,
it's crazy. Yeah.
So what kind of soil did you grow up out of to become like who we're seeing today?
Well, I was raised on the eastern shore of Maryland. I had it was a fishing and farming community in a small town called Chestertown. We were like 7 miles from Baltimore, but it took an hour and a half to get there because we'd have to go down to the Bay Bridge and take, then go back up toward Baltimore. So we were very kind of shut off from the outside world, and not necessarily an island, but it was definitely a peninsula mentality. And like we were sheltered just because of our geography. And then when I was 4, my family like switched churches, and we were like the first of 7 families to start this very conservative, very strict denomination called Independent Fundamental Baptist. Ooh, yeah. And we started a church, or my family started a church, and my whole life changed. Like there were things that we were allowed to do one week that we just stopped doing and weren't allowed to do them after that. And so that church, after my first year in school, which was kindergarten, that church started a school, and I went there from 1st grade to 12th grade. I graduated from that school. And so my whole life was like, very much, my whole early life was very much involved in this church, and everything revolved around the church. If we weren't at home, we were at the church. And it was a stressful, anxiety-ridden space. And I was this creative kid who could sing and who, carried around notebooks in which I wrote songs. I had no aspiration to grow up to be a writer. I wanted to be a songwriter. And then I ended up going to Belmont University, and I majored in music business. And that was when I realized that the competition to be a songwriter was very, very stiff, but I kept writing. I kept doing it. And so when I tripped into writing books, it was, I guess, probably after my second kid was born. My then wife, and now my ex-wife, she said to me, "I think you should think about writing children's books," which I guess that had dawned on me. That had been something that I had maybe thought of, like doing it one time just because I thought I could. Um, I didn't know that people were going to like connect to it to such a degree, but it took a little while because I ended up writing a book, and my agent, sent it out to all the publishers, and we got no after no after no after no. I mean, it was like I got a lot of no's on my children's books, despite having the contacts and despite knowing, I had a lot. There were a lot of things that made sense for me to, a lot of things that I had going for me in that process that other people don't have. So it wasn't, it was definitely a little it was personal. I had people ask if they could if I'd be willing to put my wife's name on it. Because I was a little bit of a lightning rod, I guess, for some people, because of, I ran a blog called Jesus Needs New PR. And so it was, I guess I was seen as a little bit of a little bit problematic for some. But anyway, so Jessica and I ended up self-publishing that book, and we ended up selling all but 200 of the 5,000 copies that we printed. And so one of those publishers came back and said, "Okay, I'm ready to do this. We're ready to do this. Let's do it." And at that point, I'd already started writing a book called When God Made You. And that is, Tom, I didn't know that book was going to connect with so many people, and that it was going to open doors for me to do this. But it kind of took me full circle, because, all those years of me, like, focusing on rhyming text, and trying to make sense of one idea and putting it down in a story sense, or in words. As I was trying to learn how to write songs, this is kind of similar. It's just, I'm doing it for kids and not for adults.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So. And I remember when that first book just took off. It caught fire, and everyone was talking about it. And it connected with something in, I think, the psyche of so many people, that like there's this child in each of us that just never felt loved and accepted. And your writing talks directly to like that inner child that is wondering, am I okay? Am I loved? Am I good? And like the theologies that the fundamentalist aspects of the faith, like they don't speak to that part. They squelch that part. They snuff that part. And I just think that you're writing, that's the connection to not just children, but even adults. They'll like read it and start crying, is because you're talking to that inner child in each of us that wants to know, am I loved? Am I okay?
And I didn't, I don't think I realized to what degree I was writing to myself in the process of writing these books, these children's books. But I've learned, in my adventure in therapy, that all of the things that I want my kids to know are also things that I want my inner child to learn and to experience. And I I mean, I definitely kind of like, there was a part of me that wanted to write books that introduced God or introduced spirituality to my children in a way that I was not introduced. So that was certainly a desire. But at the same time, it took me a while, I didn't completely connect with the concept in the beginning that in addition to that, I was also trying to heal the pain that I experienced
Mm.
in my introduction to God.
Yeah. And you were running a blog called Jesus Needs New PR, which is a wonderful name. Um, like when was like you kind of grew up in this fundamentalist Baptist, like unapologetically fundamentalist. A lot of fundamentalists try to like camouflage the fact that they're fundamentalists with like flashy music and lights and fog shows and stuff, but like they're just unapologetically
Yeah.
fundamentalist. Like when did you
Right.
recognize this isn't healthy? This is not helping me. This is actually harmful and traumatic. Was there a moment or was it a slow burn?
It was a slow burn in a lot of ways,
Mm.
um, because every step away from my childhood created a drama or a chaos in my life, specifically with my like members of my family and people that I did life with. And so like every time I remember in college, I was 19 when I went to my very first movie in a theater. And I remember my parents learning that I had gone to see this movie. And I mean, my mom cried like I had, been caught with, drug paraphernalia. Like it was just, it was, it, and so every little thing, whether it was something that I chose to do, that was like a rule that I was breaking, or even if I like started to think about theology in a different way. Like if I know I dabbled in Calvinism when I was in college, and you might have thought that I was like involved in connected to the occult, because I was like researching and thinking about Calvinism. And so like there was this chaos that I learned early on, or this experience of change that I started to like not tell my parents what was going on in my story, because like it just created a lot of drama. So it was a slow process, because not only was I really wanted things to change in my story. I didn't want to do the things that I was taught as a kid, but I also had this overwhelming relationship with fear that that only allowed me to embrace or engage God in new ways in a limited capacity. And so it was not, I mean, that experience, the walking away from my childhood fundamentalism it was a decade, walking away from just being able to celebrate God how I wanted to celebrate God. And then it was watching what happened to Katrina with Hurricane Katrina, that kind of like stopped me in my tracks. It was like I woke up to an America and a conservative theology and politics and cultural understanding that looked nothing like Jesus. And I thought for sure that I was, pursuing things that looked a little bit like Jesus. And so Katrina changed everything about my politics. I did the opposite of in 2006, the election, I voted the exact opposite of what I would have voted in 2004. And I didn't have the theology to support it at that point. I was certainly exploring it, But the theology came later. I just decided that I was not going to vote for myself anymore. And so that was I didn't have like, it was just, it was a me thing. It was like, it wasn't like I had read something that kind of woke me up to this new way of thinking about, political and cultural things. I just was like, if I'm supposed to follow Jesus, I feel like Jesus would stand up for anybody except for themselves when life was okay for them. And life was okay for me. And so I just started to think of my vote as what can I do to help other people?
Wow,
and then the theology kind of came later.
Yeah. There seems to be, like, the more that we listen to that inner person, the inner child, if you will, like, it's really hard to put words on what we experience on the interior. And so we don't know how to, being Western and everything is cerebral, we don't know then how to experience that and how that can actually guide us. And, when you run into like an author that finally puts the words on something that you've been like feeling, it's like, that's it right there. Like that feeling of, oh my gosh, I've known this for so long, but I didn't know how to say it. Was that like an experience in that election year where you've had this inner something that just doesn't have words yet? Was there like an author or a person that finally did put some words on it for you that helped you be like, this?
I think that there were a lot of relationships that I was kind of newly engaging with friends who were starting to think outside the box. And I feel like there were conversations where we were kind of like, in some ways, figuring it out together. This was before we had the word deconstruction. This was, I think, I guess the closest thing that you might be is like, there was this like emergent church movement that I think was like kind of bubbling, like starting to get some buzz a little bit around the country. And it just, and so I had some friends who were somehow connected to that. Certainly not necessarily, like, they were all like, some of them were, very much like fully embracing a more progressive understanding of God and culture. And some of them were like really kind of in that moderate world. And so like, we were just all having conversations. There was a lot of talks where we would just like think about life and how it could be different and how it should be different. And I had, when I was in 2020, no, not, I'm sorry, in the year 2000, when George W. Bush, like, kind of launched his conservative campaign for presidency, and he did so under this compassionate conservatism. I fell for that hook, line, and sinker. Like, I thought that, like, man, what a novel idea to have these conservative values, but then for there to be compassion mixed in as well. I thought, wow, that's really beautiful for that, for where I was. And then I saw Katrina happen under his presidency, and there was zero compassion, and there was racism, and there was him going and seeing and hanging out with the white people, and these people who were not white having to be displaced from their homes, and there was no help, and there's like, it took forever for anything to work. Like, it just blew my mind that there was no compassion. And so that compassion was like became this thing where I just sort of wanted to, what's the worst that could happen if I like that I love people way too much, that I love people outside of my experience too much, and I was okay with that. I was okay with risking that, and so that launched into like me finding a little bit of freedom to explore theologies that were outside of my understanding. When I also did some traveling, a lot of traveling with a relief organization called World Vision. And, so I was going to other countries and meeting lots of different people. And my theology did not make sense for the people who I met. Like it made sense for me as a white guy from the United States. But when I took that experience and that understanding and I applied it to the people who I was meeting in other countries, it was like, how is this a real thing? How is this a thing that I'm going to continue to embrace, this idea that if somebody does not subscribe to my understanding of who Jesus is and what Jesus supposedly did for us, that they are going to go to hell. And was I really willing to just continue engaging God or engaging a God who, from my perspective, was going to send a really large percentage of humanity to eternal damnation? And I eventually was able to say no to that. Like, I just couldn't get my head around it, couldn't get my heart around it. It just made no sense. And so it was certainly not I'm making it sound like it was a real easy thing, but it was my relationship with my friends who were still very much in the conservative world. I mean, it rocked my world in a lot of ways. But love, this desire to love other people, just sort of rang true and rang truer than all of the people who were trying to hold on to their values, hold on to their their statures in culture, and wanting things to stay the same and wanting things to be traditional and wanting things to not change, not move, because that's what quote unquote America was built on. Well, America was, and so you have to reevaluate. Well, what was America built on? Yeah, America had some good ideas that helped launch a society, but America also had some really shitty ideas that helped launch a society, and we like to acknowledge what the positive things and only paint those things with positive strokes of colors, and instead looking at it from a reality standpoint and or from a perspective that is not our own. And so when you start to do that, your experience and your understanding of things start to change.
Yeah. Mine didn't start at Katrina. I was really not into news and politics. I didn't follow any of it. I was blind. Mine, gosh, I don't remember when it was. It was Barack Obama. His first election is the first time I switched camps, and I don't even remember. I didn't have words for it at the time. And I kind of grew up in that conservative, fundamentalist Pentecostal kind of a tradition where, we listen to Jack Van Impe all the time and his interpretation of news events and all that. And I remember telling my dad that that I voted for Obama, and he just looked at me like I grew a second head, and he's like, but he's the Antichrist. And it's just like, oh gosh.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
every Democratic president was going to be the Antichrist growing up, and never turned out to be.
Totally.
But I started to
Never.
that's when I started to be like, things didn't make sense. And it's only till like recent years I've started to understand, when Christianity became the dominant culture many years ago, all of a sudden the gospel didn't make sense to like somebody who held all the power, because it wasn't written for them and to them. And so we spiritualized everything. And that's where you're saying, like, it just didn't make sense on the ground with these people in a different country that, they don't have food, they don't have shelter and water and basic necessities. And I'm going over here and trying to pitch them this spiritual thing. And it's like the gospel didn't make sense to us because we spiritualized everything. It was a spiritual salvation for spiritual sins to save you from spiritual damnation. And like, you really dive into Jesus and what he's talking about in a social context and a political context, and it's like, well, I guess when you finally see it, you can't unsee it. And it's like, oh my gosh, how did I miss this? Well, it's quite clear how we missed it. We spiritualized it.
Oh, I right around that time, shortly after Katrina, the church that I belonged to, as we were walking into the service, we were all handed small rocks, and those we all, like, everyone's holding onto these rocks, and we didn't know exactly why we had them. And it ended up being that it was for an illustration by the pastor, who preached a sermon that basically was saying it is our job to keep these rocks in our hands from crying out. And I'm like, Tom, at that point in my life, I was so tired of stupid, nonsensical illustrations that were trying to spiritualize, or like you said, over spiritualize something that there was no chance these rocks were going to say anything. And so, like, why were we trying to pretend that they were going to?
Right.
And why were we being, it was almost like we were being gaslit, like, for the reasons of, because they wanted us to, like, focus our own spirituality on praising God, because there might be a chance that these things over here take our jobs. And I just, like, it's just nonsense. And so that was, that was like one of the very last times I went to that particular church. But it really launched into, like, me diving into me personally figuring out what I believe. And I'm still in some ways figuring that out. Mm-hmm. But I'm at a place now where I'm okay with the questions. To me, it's like, I don't need everything to fall into some neat little story that I'm going to take and proselytize. I just know that I want to embrace the ideas that Jesus encouraged us to do, and look for ways to live those out in my everyday life. Some of them don't make sense. I agree. Like, it doesn't always make sense. But I just feel like love is a powerful way to show up in people's stories, and to, not change the world, but, like, change one person's experience in the here and now. And so I feel like that's I'm okay. My faith has become a situation where I'm okay with all of the questions, and I can kind of just, like, I don't know. I think I don't know is, like, one of the the biggest faith statements that you can actually say, because I was raised in an environment where everybody knew.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody, like, if you had a question, there was either an answer that was going to be presented, or they were going to research it for me and get back to me. And they always did, and they always came back with what they believed or what they knew that God wanted, me to think.
Mm.
And I just am like, I just don't. I'm not there anymore. I don't need that.
Yeah.
My faith is not about answers. It's about contentment and compassion and empathy, and finding ways to stand up for people who are in or elevate the voices of people who need to be heard.
Yeah. And that rock illustration and the whole having answers to all the questions, like it got me thinking that, like, we created church as like this closed system, and like it's like it's an oil refinery that makes enough oil to keep itself going, but doesn't actually benefit society in any kind of a way. And we're trying to create like a subculture that becomes a dominant force in society. And some of those subcultures are even more sub than others. When you get into a peninsula fundamentalist Baptist church that even the other Baptists across the way have it wrong. It's like we're creating these closed systems that we are then the dispensers of knowledge, the dispensers of truth, the dispensers even of the questions you're allowed to ask. We're just going to dispense those to you as well. And it's like, it got me thinking, like, here's a rock, keep it from crying out this week by the way that you live. And, like, where will you have to go to worship to keep the rock from crying out? Well, you're just going to have to come back next Sunday to keep this rock from crying out, because this is the place where you worship. And you see that closed system is like, my gosh.
It's circular. It's all built in to keep the system producing.
Right. Yeah.
It's, it's very much which makes sense, because so much what America does, or what we do here in the United States, is built on this concept of the free market, capitalism, and whatever. And so, like, it's all about fueling the system of capitalism. And so we have kind of borrowed ideas from, other, the economic way of thinking, and brought them into this faith. And we're constantly trying to keep the wheel turning, spinning. And you're right. Like, it's all about the system. It's not about worship. It's about like creating this environment that if somebody changes, if somebody, like, has a story that's really, really awful, and somehow that particular experience starts to see a change, or make a change happen in that person's story, that's going to energize other people to stay in the, stay motivated and keep going. And so it was just this, it's charades. It's theater. And it only matters to the people who are in that experience, or who believe the same way.
Yes.
It does not work.
Yes.
It means nothing to the person you meet in Uganda, or the person you meet in Mumbai, or the person you meet in the Philippines. Like, it doesn't translate.
Or Meyer.
It means nothing.
Or the person you meet in the grocery store, right? Like,
absolutely.
Yeah, like, and that's, but it's our job to try and convert and convince them to get them into our closed system, so that our subculture becomes more dominant and more dominant and more dominant. And when I became the pastor of the church I'm at now, I, like, my first office day, I've been here 5 years now, but my very first office day, I pulled in and I had a little bit of a nervous breakdown, because I felt zero need to convert or convince anybody. And I didn't know how to have a faith that wasn't built on that. And I remember I called my wife as I pulled in the parking lot, and I'm like freaking out. I'm like, I don't know if I'm a Christian anymore. I don't even know how I'm going to pastor this church. And it turns out that I'm still in the camp. I just have a very different philosophy and theology about what this means. Mm-hmm. And over the last 5 years of being a pastor of this church, without trying to convert and convince people, I've actually found that a church can play a role in a neighborhood that's beneficial. And I never taught this way of doing church where it's like we have a valuable role here. We're not a subculture apart from the culture. We are a part of this neighborhood and this culture. And it's just, I don't know how to put more words on it than that, but it's just been like so much more free to not have to convert and convince people and just be a source of hope and help and healing out in the neighborhoods. And it works. It really does.
Well, it's you're showing up in the stories of the people who live around you.
Yeah.
And so when you show up, when you just are a presence and you're not an angry or a violent or like a picketing presence, you are a presence that actually is a part of the solution. And I think that's the other thing I learned is that I was like, my way of thinking put me in a space where I was never part of the solution. I was never like, and so nothing got better. Nothing changed about the community. Yes, there were stories within this, like you called it, the system, that people, like lives were changed. But even when we did good for something that was not inside our little circle, it was always about like, let's celebrate all the good we're doing. It's this like the savior complex became, and we're reinforcing, this idea that look what we're doing. Look whose life we changed. Hey God. And again, there were very much times where we would, use our resources to change somebody's story. But we weren't able to do it without celebrating ourselves and yaying ourselves under the conduit of God. And rather than just like change this person's story without being, without them having to be, their story being used or their needing sensationalized or whatever. It was always about, it was always about this. Yes, we changed this person's life, but man, did they lose their dignity in the process of us like taking their story and putting it all out over our little big screens and our with a camera in their face. Wow. And we showed up and we gave them that big check and really did something good for that person's narrative. Sticking in, having the camera there, having social media, like it all just sort of like, it's all gross. And it's all like not reflective of how Jesus worked in people's stories. Yeah. Jesus, like it's funny, like Jesus went out of his way to like not tell people about what some of the stuff that he did. Yeah. Now, I mean, of course, things got, word got around, but like humility is not a value that we embrace anymore. Like we can't, we always have to be the loudest in the room, the most obnoxious in the room, the most controlling. Like we're never the quiet the quiet presence that brings the peace or brings the stability. We are the we like in so often and like and I'm not even a part of it anymore, but like evangelicalism has become the nonsensical noise in the room. It's the it's sad, and I say that it's become that way, but it's always sort of played that role in our society, where we are constantly looking around trying to see what can we do to manipulate the story in order to make things better for us, or in order to make things safer for our kids, or like keeping our kids from learning about things that are outside of our thinking. I mean, and so it's just and now, like, we just live in a society where this is happening every single day, where Christians have become such a dominant voice in certain segments of the country that they have infiltrated politics and government and judges and all these things, and they are slowly taking away rights and ideas and thoughts and diminishing everybody else's story except their own.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's how we learn to do church. So that must be how we do government too, is we have one authoritarian voice that sets the vision and standard. And then like there's actually, I just learned it this week and I have to explore it a little bit more, but like there's a Christian political philosophy out there called the 7 mountain theory, where there's 7 mountains of society, and I don't know them all, but government and entertainment and commerce, and I don't know all of them, but like it is their goal to take all 7 mountains for themselves so that they can steer culture the way that they want it to. And like that sounds very anti-Christian to me, to want to violently grab hold, as the Crusades all over again. But we spiritualized it again. We spiritualized the Crusades and set ourselves on this mission to go do it. And there's a violence to it. There is a manipulation to it. There is, but I think it comes from, this is how we learn to do church. So this must therefore be how we also do government. And I'm like getting words for it.
I think that there's like I think the average person doesn't ever explore their spirituality outside of what their experience is. And so, like I know that for me, moving away from the geography where I was raised was an important stepping stone toward me waking up. Me having the privilege of going and traveling to other countries and seeing and meeting other people's and learning their experiences woke me up. Not everybody has that privilege. Not everybody has that experience, that ability to experience things that are outside of there. You have to go looking for it. And if you don't go looking for it, you can very much stay within this thinking that as you get older and as you you dig in deeper and your roots go deeper and you before long you realize that you have this, or you don't realize, other people realize that you've developed this very me-centric concept of who God is, and anything that's outside of that can't be of God or isn't of God. And so we walk around, I have friends and family who are, they're so convinced that they are right, that every choice, every decision of who they vote for, who they like, who they don't like, who they befriend, who they don't befriend, who they participate with, and who they won't participate. It's all figured out. And it's based on this one concept that they have embraced about God and what God believes and what God, who God is for and who God is against. And I find no joy, no hope, no faith, no love, no grace in those kinds of thinking. Yeah, there are moments when grace happens. There are moments when love is a thing, but it's not an everyday part of what they're experiencing and how they're engaging the world. And I didn't want to fall prey to a thinking that became so all about me that I lost the ability to listen and hear and learn and change.
Yeah.
Because I found that as soon as I put a stake in the ground and say, this is what I believe, that belief potentially becomes problematic for somebody else. And it's not that I'm going to like shift and sway with the wind, but it's about there being grace and light and this ability to be molded and changed by other people's stories and experiences, because that's what humility is.
Mm-hmm.
And so hopefully my books will be a part of a affection toward giving kids a more light-driven, more hope-driven, more love-driven perspective about God, and that it will create foundations where they know that they are made by God and that they are good. Are they capable of making choices that are not good? Sure. But they're not like, I mean, I don't know about you, but I was raised with the thinking that I was inherently evil, that I wasn't even capable of doing good without God being involved, that I could not make a good choice without God coming in and making that choice for me. I want kids to know that God made them and God delights in who they are. And I think that as a foundation can be life-changing, because it won't be something they have to recover from and do therapy work around later on.
That there. You actually wrote, can I read something you wrote? It's right out of the book. It says, you belong, you do, you have a light inside you. You can join the big story and help God make things new. When you know who you are, and your people do too, that light that you shine is your power and truth. And there seems to be like this interplay in these words between knowing your truth and having the people around you that know it as well. Is there more power in an authority that is supported by community that you, and what does one do if they don't have that? I think we know the answer to the first question.
Well, when I was writing this book, I knew that I wanted to write about belonging, but I don't think that I fully comprehended what belonging was at the time. It wasn't until I connected the dots, because the beginning of the book is you belong, you do. That's always been true. You've belonged to yourself since you were tiny and new. And this idea of belonging to ourselves, this idea of us being worthy and worthy of being known since the day we were born, the fact that we were given that gift is a is an irreplaceable part of belonging. And I think that we have become a society, and especially in the Christian circles, where we think of ourselves as gross and disgusting, and that it's all that we, yes, we're a part of a community, but that when we aren't, that when we don't have community, or when we break apart from that community, or when we make a choice that is outside of that community, that we lose that. And I know that for me, I had to like re-identify with this idea of I belong to Matthew. And what does that mean? And what does that look like? And how does that make my relationship with you, or my relationship with the people around me? How does that change it? Well, it changes it because I am confident and secure in who I am. And when I walk into a space, I can be fully myself because I belong to me, and I can start to belong to somebody else. I mean, even Jesus said, love thy neighbor as thyself. And a pastor friend always chimes in and says, most of us do. We love other people the way we love ourselves. And a lot of times that's not necessarily a great way to love people, because we don't know how to love ourselves.
Wow.
And I think that it was the belonging to myself that was like the point, like it kind of like really, that's where the book started to take off. Because when I belong to me, I can begin to belong to other people, and I can make those choices of who I belong to. And because one of the things that I don't assume is that there's no language in the book about you belong to your dad, or you belong to your mom, or you belong, because sometimes that's not true. Sometimes that's not, sometimes that is, I didn't want to assume anything about someone's story. And so like there's this, you belong, you do, you belong to the people who pour life into you.
Oh, wow.
And that's, and that is like this connecting point where you can start to begin make choices that sometimes it is family, sometimes it is friendships, but it's the friendships who let you be you. And I've had to learn, over and over again the hard way, of who I belong to. And I think that sometimes we feel this, we feel this need to have these big circles of huge belonging. Well, sometimes it starts with yourself, and then it starts with one other person, or maybe two people, and it starts to build and it grows. But I do know this, that when you're in a group of people who seem to have a true connection with one another, that so much so that light shines from that group in various colors, that people are free to be themselves fully. It is the most beautiful, sometimes uncomfortable, glorious thing, because you're experiencing light from these people who have grown into this belonging that is unique and special. And it's about all of these individuals not turning into this homogenous, group of whatever, this blob of humanity, but this beautiful rainbow-like group of people who have just found a way to truly allow people the freedom to be themselves. And it's like, and I've realized that I have found myself being able to like fully like be like feel really good in those kinds of communities and those kinds of groups. And for a time I was really uncomfortable with it. Like I was like, there was just, it was weird, and it didn't fit.
Hmm.
And I just think that, man, when I think about Jesus, and if we really were able to grasp the type of people that he would commune with, I think it would make so many of us incredibly uncomfortable. And
Yeah.
because he would hang out and he would allow the weirdest person in the room, the person that I would say that is weird, to be fully weird. And I think that we have so many like things that just that deny us the ability to let people be people, because we think it's weird, or we think it's different. Yeah. We think it's outside of the norm. And we don't, that we lose an, it's like when we see our kids, when our kids do something that is fully them. And yet that if in the context of somebody in some other place or among some other people, it would be seen as really, really silly, or really, really immature, or really, really whatever. And my desire to just let them be, I don't want to tell them that. I want them to be fully themselves and embrace it, because we're all going to get told once in a while that we don't fit in, that we don't belong. And we're going to get reminded of that our entire lives. What can we do to be a part of to fully embrace our time here, that we can actually help people fully embrace themselves, look for ways for a person just to be fully them, be fully present. And that's what I hope. I hope this book inspires people to not only find their own belonging, but give permission and freedom for other people to fully experience their own belonging. Because so many of us are so insecure and so in the healing process, and so unhealthy in our engagement of our own stories or other people's stories, that we are codependent, and we're always looking for ways to diminish ourselves. And I just think that what a joy it would be if we started gifting other people the freedom to be fully them.
I love that. I really do. And I think you are, I'm going to use a word that might be like, huh? I think you are a theologian, and you are taking these profound spiritual truths and you are making them accessible to children, and you also make adults cry because their children needs to hear these things. And so you're doing the work of a theologian, taking these thoughts about God that are helpful and healing, and you're bringing them down. And it is a talent to be able to speak theology to children like you do. And you're taking profound things and making them accessible to children. And also the adults are connecting with it as well. And I just want to thank you for your work. I want to thank you for your time. How can folks connect with you and your work? Where would you want to send them?
You go to my website, it's matthewpaulturner.com, but on social media, almost everywhere is just Matthew Paul Turner.
All right.
And so, thank you for your time, and thank you for your kind words.
Oh, Matthew, thank you for your work and your writings. I love them. Thank you much.
I'm grateful.
Well, thank you for listening to the Liminal Living podcast. I hope this conversation touched that inner child in you that longs to belong with the message you will always belong. And it is true. You belong. You do. There's a light inside of you. I think you should go get that children's book and substitute the word you with the word I and just read it to yourself over and over and over again, because you need that repetition. Maybe that's your spiritual practice for this next week. Go buy Matthew's book, The It's in the show notes. There's a link. Go check out Matthew's other works that he's done. He's written many children's books and other books and some things. Go check those out in the show notes too. And we will see you next week for another episode of the Liminal Living Podcast. It's really hard to say really fast. The Liminal Living Podcast. All right, peace out.